I made a decision that would affect the rest of my life. But when I look back over my life, I see the handwriting on the wall. And I see those three flashing warnings that said, "Hello there, welcome. This is Life After Trauma with Dr. Jan, helping you to take a stand and put an end to all the drama. Just think of me as your second mama. Hi, I am Dr. Jan, and my channel is all about the trauma and drama of domestic abuse. Before we get started, I would like to ask you a big favor. Would you hit that subscription button? And I want you to subscribe, like, and share. Help me grow this channel and get more content like this out there. Now, if you are a child of God, God never lets you go into a bad situation unaware. He doesn't do that. He always gives you a heads up before we get into serious trouble. Now, whether or not you heed or listen to the warning that he gives you, well, that's up to you. My problem is I seldom listen, and that's unfortunate. After that fateful night in the park, instead of calling it off, believe it or not, Vincent and I made the decision to get married. Yes, we did. We got engaged during our third year of college. Now, believe me, Vincent and I getting engaged was a shock to the campus of Cheney. Nobody, and I mean nobody, could believe that Vincent and I were a twosome. Why? Because we were total opposites in everything. And my family, well, my family took it rather hard. They had all tried to talk to me. They tried to reason with me. They tried to point out some obvious warning signs regarding Vincent. And they were trying to put my head on straight because obviously I wasn't thinking straight. But to no avail. My mind was made up. And God Himself gave me warning signs to try to grab my attention and give me reason to stop, look, and listen before I jumped into that serious commitment of marriage. And when I look back on my life, it is clear to me now what I couldn't see back then during my younger years. And as I look back, I see at least three glaring warning signs that should have made me stop and consider what I was about to do. What were these three signs? Well, sign number one was Vincent's his violent temper. Duh. I mean, his first outburst of anger and violence came when the two of us were discussing our plans for our upcoming wedding. We had driven to Fairmount Park and we had parked overlooking a scenic area filled with flowers and beautiful foliage. Everything was calm, peaceful, and relaxing. But then, all of a sudden, without any warning, Vincent became agitated. To this day, I do not know what I did or said that upset him. But one moment, Vincent and I were sitting in the car discussing our wedding plans. And the very next moment, Vincent jumps out of the car, slams his door shut, storms around to the passenger side of the car where I am sitting. He jerks open my door and begins yelling at me at the top of his lungs. I mean, he was screaming at me like a crazy person. Well, I was so shocked by his violent outburst of anger until I couldn't say a word. I simply froze. I just sat there, staring at him in complete horror as he ranted on and on and on. He was accusing me of being unfaithful to him, which was absolutely ridiculous. So much so that I didn't even pay him any attention. I just looked at him. But my passive behavior only made him that much more angry. And then, in a fit of rage, Vincent took his fist and he drove it through that small vent window in the passenger side of the car. He actually punched out the glass in the car, shattering the glass all over the floor where I was sitting. Immediately, his hand started bleeding profusely, and I reached out to help him, but he angrily jerked his hand away, pulled out a handkerchief from his pocket, wrapped the handkerchief around his hand, walked back around to his side of the car, got into the car, and drove me home, not saying a word. Just as quickly as his anger outburst had started, it was over. Amazingly, Vincent and I never once spoke about that incident. We both just pretended that it had never happened. But it did happen. And I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Vincent's explosive outburst. But here again, I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't have sense enough to realize that if Vincent had punched his car window out that night, and believe me, Vincent loved his 1953 green Chevy, then maybe one day, in a fit of anger, Vincent might try to punch me out once we got married. How foolish I was not to talk to someone about this, because this type of behavior was not normal. No, this was bizarre. Something was wrong, and this was a warning. This was a preview of things to come. If anything at all, this was the handwriting on the wall. His violent temper was warning sign number 1. Warning sign number 2 was even clearer. I had a vision. I had a disturbing vision of my life in the future, married to Vincent. In this vision, I was walking in a sunny field where there was tall grass, luscious grass, just trees galore, bright, beautiful flowers blooming in vivid colors. In this vision, the atmosphere was peaceful and calm. But as I looked up towards the sky, could see threatening clouds, dark clouds in the sky, way ahead in the distance. And these dark clouds seemed to be rolling across the sky and seemingly headed straight towards me. In those dark, scary clouds, I could see heavy winds and torrential rains converging on me. These winds were so fierce that they were uprooting trees and shredding the beautiful flowers, whipping them violently in all the directions. In my vision of my future with Vincent, the peace, the calm, and the tranquility that I once felt had completely vanished away, and in its place was nothing but chaos, fear, pain, and brokenness. My heart was racing as if I had been swept up by the wind and cast into a frenzy of noise and turbulence. This vision of mine was so frightening that I was petrified with fear. For the next several minutes, I just sat there with my heart beating. And now these visions of my future, married to Vincent, was taking hold of my stubborn mind. And now, warning number 3, I was no longer completely confident and secure about marrying Vincent. And you know what? I was ready to call off the wedding. Yes, it was true that I did love Vincent, but now I felt uneasy and I realized that I should not go through with this wedding. And I had been standing at the top of the stairs in my parents' house when I had this vision. And my immediate response was to go downstairs and tell my mom and dad that I was sorry for disrupting all of our plans and that I was sorry for spending all of their money that they really could not afford, just to give me, their daughter, a beautiful wedding. But I was ready to call the wedding off because I could no longer marry a man that I was beginning to feel so uncertain about, to feel so unsure of. And as I was standing at the top of the stairs, ready to go down and tell my parents my decision not to go through with the wedding, as I turned and started down the stairway to talk to my parents, the doorbell rang. My mom went to answer the door, and my dad was in the dining room, and he was building a temporary shelf for all the wedding gifts that were pouring in. And I remember Mom warmly greeting one of our neighbors that had stopped by to bring her wedding gift. The neighbor was Mrs. Covington, a sweet old lady. And she was smiling and congratulating my parents for successfully raising such a mature and intelligent Christian daughter who was about to get married. And I remember thinking to myself, intelligent? Me? Yeah, right. My parents were so happy and they were beaming with pride while I was still standing on the steps. I thought to myself, no problem. Mrs. Covington is here, but I will tell my parents my decision that I'm not going through with the wedding after Mrs. Covington leaves. So I quietly tried to turn and duck back up the stairs and to get out of sight But unfortunately, Mrs. Covington had spotted me in the hallway going up the stairs, and she called me to come back down so that she could give the future bride a big hug. I sighed, turned, walked slowly down the stairs, and went over and gave Mrs. Covington a big hug and a kiss. I could see that she had holding in her hand a large, beautifully wrapped gift. And at her insistence, I opened the wedding gift right in front of her because she wanted to see the expression on my face when I opened the gift. You know, it was very beautiful, very expensive. It was a 4-piece silver canister set, something that I had wanted for my kitchen one day, but I had never actually thought I would have it so soon. And there I was at that moment, watching the joy and the pride on my parents' face and hearing the congratulations coming from the lips of Mrs. Covington. There, at that moment, without praying to God, without seeking the wisdom of and advice of my parents, and without going to someone older and wiser than myself, I made up my mind to do the unthinkable. Rather than embarrass and bring shame to my parents by calling off this wedding and not wanting them to be humiliated and disappointed after they had spent so much money on this wedding, money that they could ill afford, just so that they could give me, their oldest daughter, a beautiful and memorable wedding that I would treasure always. I decided to go through with the wedding plans. I made a decision that would affect the rest of my life. And not just my life only, but the future lives of my yet unborn children, years before they were even born. But when I look back over my life, I see the handwriting on the wall. And I see those 3 flashing warnings that said, stop. Don't rush into this. Think about what you are about to do. Pray for wisdom. But no, not me. This little gal thinking she knew it all. But in reality, she was as green as this Granny Smith apple. And ignoring all the warning signs, I took destiny into my own hands and I went through with the wedding plans. In my day, older people would say, they had this saying, you make your bed hard, you have to lie in it. Well, I had made my decision. I had made my bed hard, and I was about to lie in it. I was in a mess. What in the world was I going to do?